On the frontier settlement of Xenovis IV2, there was one law everyone knew, etched deeper than any regulation the colony council had ever put to vote. Never approach the Felkar dens after nightfall. No warnings were posted on metal signs. No. Regulations blinked across datapads. It was something passed in low voices over mess hall tables and round heating vents on long, frozen nights. You didn't go near the dens because those who did either never returned or came back with stories. That left listeners staring at the doors and windows for the rest of the week. Lyra Caden had broken that unwritten rule 3 months ago. It had saved her life. Now, as midnight frost settled over the crystalline forests, she sat by a low, blue-white fire in the heart of a Felkar den, watching 3 enormous cubs wrestle over a strip of dried meat. The shard trees outside chimed softly as the wind slid through their hollow crystalline trunks, filling the night with glassy music. Inside the den, the air was warmer, scented with smoke, damp stone, and the sharp wild musk of Felkar fur. The cubs were already the size of grown humans, all paws and fangs and awkward limbs. Their fur shimmered silver-black in the firelight, thick and layered against the biting cold of Xenovis IV2. They growled and tumbled over each other, claws scraping on the stone floor, their glowing eyes bright with playful ferocity. This was Leader Grom's den. The alpha of the Felkar pack had gone out at sunset, silent as shadow, and twice as lethal, to hunt along the frozen ravines. Before leaving, he had done something no settler would have believed. If Lyra tried to explain it, he had entrusted his cubs to a human. To her, Lyra tugged her thermal blanket tighter round her shoulders, the reflective fabric crackling softly, even near the fire. She could see her breath frosting in the air. The den's ceiling arched high overhead, carved over years by claws and patience into a protective dome. Embedded shards of crystal caught the firelight, throwing fractured reflections across the walls. There were places in the galaxy where people paid fortunes for crystals like that. Here, they were just part of a home. Home, she thought, and the word no longer felt strange. It had not always been this way. When she first crashed on Xenovis, IV2 ship gutted by a rogue micrometeor swarm, systems failing. Navigation reduced to desperate guesswork, she'd thought she was dead. The escape pod had punched through the atmosphere like a falling star and buried itself in a frozen plain, alarms screaming, hull buckling. The first thing she'd seen outside was the crystalline forest. The second had been a Felkar. They were apex predators on Xenovis IV2, legendary even in spacer tales, massive, lupine creatures with layered fur that refracted light, intelligent eyes, and jaws that could crack open an armored rover. Intelligent and territorial, the settlers said, capable of complex communication, but uninterested in coexistence. They claimed the Felkars could mimic human speech. But Lyra had discovered something far more profound: their own language of growls, posture, scent, and subtle movements. Most settlers feared them. Lyra hadn't had that luxury. Alone, stranded at the edge of the settlement's known territory, with a broken comm unit and failing power reserves, fear was pointless. She had stumbled across Grom's pack when she was days from freezing to death and everything could have ended there. Instead, it had begun. It was Grom's mate that changed everything. The Felkar female had been wounded by a settler's automated fence-deep lacerations, gone septic. Beneath her shimmering coat, infection had set in, fever burning through her body. The pack hovered between anger and desperation, unable to help her, not willing to abandon her. Lyra had recognized the smell of infection, the crazed eyes, the rapid breathing. She'd seen it before, in frontier clinics on other worlds. She approached Grom slowly, medical kit visible, hands open, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her teeth. She had no words in their tongue then, no formal way to ask permission. Only tone and posture and hope. Somehow, he had understood. She spent hours working on the wounded Felkar, cleaning the wounds, injecting carefully measured doses of antibiotics, whispering reassurance that the female could not understand. But that calmed Lyra herself. Grom watched her every movement, his bulk filling the cave entrance, ready to end her at the first sign of betrayal. In the end, it hadn't been enough. The infection had gone too deep, too long untreated. The Alpha's mate died with her head resting on Lyra's lap, Grom pressing his muzzle against his fallen partner in a rumbling, grief-stricken sound that shook dust from the den's ceiling. Lyra had expected that to be the moment she died. Instead, Grom had turned to her, eyes burning with something more complicated than rage. He had seen her try. He had seen her risk herself for one of his own. Slowly, he had stepped forward, lowered his massive head, and exhaled a warm gust of air over her hands. Scenting her thoroughly, from that moment, she was no longer just human. She was pack. The arrangement baffled the other settlers. Some whispered that Lyra must have gone feral. Others theorized clever manipulation on the Felkar's part, some elaborate predatory trick. Lyra didn't waste breath arguing. They hadn't. Seeing Grom lying sleepless through the night as his mate faded, pushing his enormous body against Lyra's back to share warmth. They hadn't heard the cubs cry when their mothers scent faded from the den. They hadn't watched Grom grieve. Now, months later, she sat inside his den like a strange, gangly cousin among the cubs. The youngsters' play quieted at last, their growls fading to low rumbles of contentment. One flopped against Lyra's legs, pinning the edge of her blanket under his weight. Another curled beside the fire, head on its paws, eyes half closed but still tracking the shadows. The smallest cub, the one most cautious around her at first, thumped down directly against her hip, pressing his warmth into her side. "You little ice bricks," Lyra murmured, fondly scratching under his jaw. He leaned into her hand with a pleased grumble. Her chrono blinked in the dim light. 0:17. She was unarmed. That was Grom's rule, enforced without exception. No weapons inside the den. No knives, no rifles, nothing that could be turned against his family. Lyra carried only her medkit and her clothes, her tool belt left hanging on a hook near the entrance. Here, trust was absolute, or it didn't exist at all. The first sound was soft enough that she might have missed it if not for the stillness and odd, deliberate scraping on stone, not the natural shifting of ice or the distant chime of crystal. A pattern, to control, to be wind, to irregular, to be a native animal's claws, Lyra's head snapped up. The cubs felt it a heartbeat later. Their ears pricked forward, pupils narrowing as their eyes flared bright yellow. The smallest lifted his head from her hip, a low warning growl rumbling in his chest. "Easy," Lyra whispered, though her own pulse had leapt into a sprint. The scratching came again, closer. She rose quietly, feeling every bruise and scar. A frontier life complained as she moved. The den entrance loomed as a black archway, ringed with frost. The fire's glow didn't reach that far. It only scratched pale color along the first few meters of tunnel. The entrance exploded inward. Shards of ice and stone burst from the opening in a spray, rattling across the den floor. The cubs yelped and scrambled back, for figures rushed in, silhouettes hard-edged against the faint starlight behind them. Tactical armor, matte black and angular, helmets with polarized visors, plasma rifles already raised and tracking. Poachers. Lyra's gut turned to ice. She knew that insignia, a stylized torch crossed with a curved fang, bright against the armor at their shoulders, Tauren Syndicate, across half a dozen systems. Their name was spoken with disgust or fear, depending on who you were. Traders in hides and teeth, traffickers in captured wildlife, and on more than one savage frontier world. Slavers. On Xenovis IV-2, they hunted Felcars, alive. The cubs sold hide to illegal collectors. Dead, their pelts and fangs fetched even more. These four were young three barely older than the settlement's apprentices. By the look of their frames, the fourth moving with the sharp authority of someone in charge. No adults, a cheap raid team, fast and disposable. The syndicate must have thought this pack an easy prize. They hadn't accounted for a human in the den. Lyra stepped in front of the cubs without thinking, blocking the line of fire with her own body. Her heart hammered so hard her vision trembled. But when she spoke, her voice came out steady. "Leave," she said. Now. The leader stepped forward, helmet turning as if studying her. When she spoke, her voice crackled through a comm filter, distorted but unmistakably female and cold. "A human," she said, amused, playing mother to the monsters. One of the younger poachers snickered. The leader leveled her rifle, the muzzle humming with a rising charge. "Step aside, colonist. You have no idea what you're protecting." Behind Lyra, the cubs' fear sharpened into anger. Their growls deepened, chesty and raw. She could feel the vibrations through her back, the tremor of their bodies ready to spring and die in the same instant. "They're inexperienced," Lyra said. Her throat felt tight, but she forced each word through it. "Against you. They won't survive." She spread her arms slightly, as if her comparatively frail body could somehow widen into a shield. "This is your last warning. Leave, space pirates, poachers, syndicate scum." They all had something in common. They believed that people who cared were weak. The woman laughed, harsh and humorless. "Last warning," she echoed. "Listen." To her, brave little herd animal, the rifle's barrel lifted a centimeter, centering on Lyra's forehead. "Move, or I put you down first." Lyra did not move. Her mind flicked over her choices. She had no weapon, no tech advantage, no squad watching her back. She had basic colony combat training, most of it learned in VR sims and drills in the settlement's dusty practice yard. But she also had something every animal recognized. She had something to protect. Her hand shot out, fingers closing around the nearest thing that could serve as a weapon. A thick, half-charred branch from the fire. Embers flared as she yanked it free, scattering sparks across the floor. Before the poachers could fully react, Lyra hurled the burning brand straight at the leader's face. The woman jerked back with a curse as flame and ash burst against her visor. For one crucial heartbeat, her aim wavered. Lyra ran. She slammed into the nearest poacher, driving her shoulder into the softer joint at his hip. It wasn't pretty or elegant. It was raw momentum. He staggered and went down with a shout, his plasma rifle skittering across the stone. Clattering against the den wall, Lyra dove for it, fingers brushing the grip. The gun didn't respond. The biometric lock blinked red and stayed dead beneath. Her touch, useless. A heavy boot slammed into her chest. Pain exploded through her ribs and blasted the air from her lungs. She flew backward, the world flipping end over end. Then hit the floor so hard stars burst behind her eyes. The cubs launched themselves forward. They were too young, their movements driven more by instinct than technique. Their attacks wild and uncoordinated. They tore at armor, teeth scraping against composite plating. One poacher shouted as claws dug into the flexible gaps at his joints. Another swung his rifle like a club, smashing it into a cub's head and sending the youngster sprawling. The youngest cub tried to leap past them toward the leader. A crackling net of blue light burst from one of the rifles. The shock web wrapped around the cub mid-leap, dropping him to the stone with a scream. Electricity danced across his fur. He writhed, helpless, his paws twitching, muzzle foaming with terrified saliva. No. Lyra's voice tore free in a ragged shout. Without thinking, she crawled half-blind, chest burning toward the trapped cub. The ground vibrated beneath her palms with the force of combat. A rifle but crashed down across her shoulder, sending fresh agony lancing up her arm. Still, she groped for the net, fingers searing where they brushed the electrified strands. "Stop moving," one of the poachers snapped. "You're not the target." Lyra grabbed a loose stone and hurled it at his helmet as hard as she could. The rock struck with a sharp crack, making his head snap to the side. He swore and turned his rifle toward her. The leader moved faster. A hand clamped down on the back of Lyra's neck, jerking her upright. Cold metal pressed against her temple. The hum of the charged plasma rifle filled her skull. "Foolish human," the leader hissed, now close enough that Lyra could smell the recycled air from inside her helmet. Lyra closed her eyes not out of surrender, but to listen. Under the harsh breathing of the poachers and the crackle of the shock net, under the cub's panicked keening, there was another sound. Low, massive, resonant enough that the very stones seemed to drink it in. A growl. No, not a growl. A promise. The air in the den thickened with it, a deep, rolling thunder that vibrated in her bones and made the hackles on the cub's necks bristle. Even through pain, the poachers shifted uneasily, guns pivoting toward the entrance. Grom had returned. The den mouth darkened, blocked entirely by a vast silhouette. Leader Grom stepped inside. Silver-black fur lifted along his spine like a crest, his eyes searing the air with twin amber flames. Blood from his fresh kill stained his muzzle in dark streaks, steaming in the cold as it dripped onto the stone. He took in everything in less than a heartbeat. Cubs in danger, human packmate injured, intruders with weapons. The temperature in the den seemed to plummet. The poacher holding Lyra didn't complete the trigger pull. Grom moved. For a creature his size, logic said he should not be able to accelerate like that. One instant he blocked the doorway. The next, he was on the leader, a streak of living shadow. His jaws closed around her torso, armor and all. The crunch of composite and bone echoed like a gunshot. He shook once, sending her flying into the wall. She hit with a sickening impact and crumpled, armor buckling. She did not rise. The remaining poachers fired in panic. Plasma bolts flared the den in blinding white, turning every crystal shard into a miniature sun. Grom was already among them, his claws tearing through armor like thin foil. One poacher screamed as his arms separated from his body in a spray of light and blood. Another tried to retreat, stumbling toward the entrance, but got only 3 steps before Grom's bulk slammed him to the floor. The stone cracked under the impact. Lyra scrambled back to the cubs, ignoring the chaos. She threw herself over the smallest, shielding him as best she could while she clawed at the shock net. Each contact burned her fingers, nerves singing with pain, but she kept tearing, ripping glowing strands loose one by one. The eldest cub, emboldened by his father's presence, surged to his feet and joined the attack. He lunged at the last standing poacher, jaws closing around the exposed back of the woman's knee where armor plates parted. His teeth sank in. She shrieked, collapsing, and Grom finished it one swift, decisive strike. In less than a minute, it was over, for armed professionals lay scattered across the den floor, armor shredded, weapons cooling in twitching hands. Silence crashed down, broken only by Lyra's harsh breathing and the soft whimpers of the cubs. Grom stood amid the carnage, chest heaving. His fur was ruffled and streaked with new blood. Some of it his, most of it not. Slowly, methodically, he scanned the den, ensuring every threat was neutralized. Then his gaze found the cubs and Lyra. She knelt there, half wrapped in a half-destroyed net, fingers blistered and raw, clothes torn and stained. Her shoulder throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She was shaking not from the cold, but from the ragged come-down of adrenaline. The smallest cub pressed himself against her, whining, while she stroked his neck with trembling hands, checking for burns, for damage, for anything she could fix. When Grom approached, the cubs fell silent. He moved slowly now, massive paws, whispering over the stone. Up close, he seemed even larger, a living mountain of fur and muscle. His warm breath washed over Lyra's face, carrying the wild scent of blood and frozen night. This moment, Lyra knew, would decide everything. She had stood between his cubs and death, armed with nothing but a burning stick and desperation. She had taken blows meant for them, torn apart an electrified net with her bare hands. and thrown herself again and again into danger she had no real hope of overcoming. Not because she was a settler, not because it was the right diplomatic move. Because they were her family, Grom lowered his head until his forehead touched hers. His fur brushed her skin, softer than its wild appearance suggested. The world narrowed to the shared breath between them, the faint crackle of the dying fire, the steady, immense heartbeat of the Alpha echoing through his skull and into her own. Among Felkars, Lyra had learned this gesture was rare and sacreder. Vow, a recognition deeper than words. Pack, it said. Mine. Lyra's eyes stung. Tears blurred her vision, spilling over her cheeks and tracking down the grime and blood. She didn't wipe them away. She reached up instead, resting her hand against Grom's scarred muscle, feeling fresh scratches where armor and weapons had. Raked his fur. I'm sorry, she whispered in the rough, growling cadence of their shared tongue. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. I couldn't do more. Grom's answering rumble resonated through her bones like distant thunder. You did everything. The meaning wasn't in grammar or vocabulary. It was in the way his chest vibrated, in the angle of his ears, the tilt of his head, the warmth in his eyes. It wrapped around her like another blanket, heavy and solid and real. Outside, the first pale rays of dawn crept over the crystalline forest, turning every shard tree into a spear of light. The wind quieted, as if the planet itself were catching its breath. By then, Lyra was sitting with the cubs tucked close around her, their bodies pressed against her sides and legs, a protective barrier of fur and heat. The youngest had fallen asleep, with his head in her lap, breathing slow and deep, the remnants of scorch marks fading beneath his thick coat. She stroked his ears absently, eyes distant. Grom stood at the den entrance, a silent sentinel. His silhouette was framed by sunrise, every line of him screaming danger to anyone foolish enough to approach. Behind him, in the ravine below, the poachers' bodies would be dragged and tossed far from the den, a visible warning in the frozen snow. Predators understood territory, so did those who hunted them. The settlers would have questions when they found the remains. They would wonder who had angered the Felkars this time, who had drawn the attention of the syndicate. Some would demand that Lyra return to the settlement where it was safe, away from the monsters. Others would whisper that she had abandoned her own kind for beasts, that something in her had broken out here on the edge of civilization. They would not understand why she chose to stay. They would not understand the way the youngest cub shifted in his sleep, seeking her warmth, trust, unthinking and absolute. They would not understand how the eldest occasionally glanced at her as if taking his cue for calm from her breathing. They would not understand the way Grom positioned himself not just in front of the den, but in front of her. They would not understand that, sitting there with aching bones and blistered fingers, her heart felt more anchored than it ever had aboard ships and stations that called themselves home. Lyra looked down at the cub asleep on her lap. His paws twitched in some harmless dream, claws flexing. She laid her hand gently over his chest and felt his steady heartbeat under her palm. Family, she thought. Watching the rising light fill the den, It wasn't about species. It wasn't about DNA, shared history, or matching faces. Family was simple. Family was the ones you were willing to stand in front of when the guns were raised. The ones you were willing to fight for, bleeding and afraid, with nothing but your stubborn, fragile body and the certainty that you would rather die than let them fall. On Xenovis IV-2, among apex predators and frosted crystal forests, Lyra Caden had broken the one unwritten rule, and in doing so, she had finally found her lack.